There's a lot of dynamic range in this particular scene. The actual discrepancy between the shadows and the highlights is extreme. What if, for example, I wanted my shot, and this is what people do, and this is the big downfall of WYSIWYG with EVF photography with mirrorless cameras. Doesn't matter if it's the LCD or the EVF. It's like, well, you know, I want my shot to look like this. I want most of the scene to be black. The only thing I want to appear in the shot is the highlights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial in a bunch of negative exposure compensation. But what you've done is that you've actually done things ass backwards. Instead of actually, and of course with ambient lighting, you don't have to worry about sculpting your light, and you don't have to worry about lighting ratios, you just have to worry about highlight clipping. What you've done is you put the cart before the horse by actually setting negative exposure compensation, for example. Well, this is the way I want the shot to look. This is what people do with mirrorless cameras. They'll actually dial in negative exposure compensation. It's like, I want everything to be black except for the highlights. Well, that's great, but you're actually doing that in your camera. I've said this 1,000 times. You need to saturate in your camera and expose in your computer. Well, no, that's not right, because the camera is all about exposure. No, the camera is about not clipping your highlights, point number one. Point number two, getting as much information as possible to work with in your computer, regardless of what the dynamic range is, whether it's great or small, to work with. It's actually significant on the XT3, for example, or the XT2, or even a GFX camera. So I'm going to take that out. Okay, I know I can actually go 3/4 of a stop. Right now I actually have highlight warnings on, which I never use. I just do that for the demonstration of this video. It's like, well, yeah, but I don't want my shot to look like this. You know, I don't want to see... Hold on a second. I don't want to see all of this stuff down here. The only thing I actually want to appear in the shot is the stuff that's in the highlight. Well, that's fine. So why are you putting the cart before the horse? You set your lighting ratios, or you sculpt your light, and of course we're talking about speed light or flash photography, but we're not doing that here. We're talking about ambient illumination. The more information, the better. It doesn't matter what the shot is, ambient illumination or flash photography. Sensor saturation is king. What's sensor saturation? You could say it's ETTR, which means exposed to the right, but it's actually more specific than that. Sensors, well, I want my shot to look like this. This is my vision for the shot, and this is, I'm going to dial it down here. You see, I've gone 2.5 stops below. That's fine. So now everything down here has totally lost tonality. There's no information in the shadows. What you've done is you've undersaturated the sensor for the shot. If I actually take this shot like this right now at f2.8, f4, f5.6, doesn't make any difference. We're actually talking about undersaturating. Yeah, but this is how I want the shot to look. I want everything to be here black and everything up here to be black. I just want to see this strip of correctly exposed highlights. Well, that's wonderful. Why are you doing that in your camera? This is the downfall of WYSIWYG photography with mirrorless cameras, whether it be the EVF or the LCD, doesn't make any difference. If you get on the EVF, it's the same as the LCD and vice versa. Yeah, well, you know, I don't want my shot to look like this. Now, we're not talking about clipping the highlights here. Now I know I can actually got 2/3 of a stop, even though I got extreme dynamic range between my shadows and my highlights here. I know I've got 2/3 of a stop where I'm not going to clip out any information in my highlights. I'm actually getting highlight clipping warnings right now. I'm in matrix metering. Let's go over to spot. Okay? So now this is another way. Of course, there's more than one way to skin a cat, as the old saying goes, at least what they say in the South. More than one way to skin a cat. Just an old saying, by the way. Right, so I'm still same exposure. I don't want my shot to look like that. This is not how I want my shot to look. I want my shot to look like this. That's why I'm going to use this for spot metering. I'm going to correctly expose. It's still a little too much, so I'm going to dial it back a little bit, down to negative 2/3 of a stop, essentially. This is how I want my shot to look. The more information you bring to the computer, the better. As long as you have your correct lighting ratios and the correct sculpting of your light set, which you can't do anything like this. Everything's dependent on the sun and the weather, of course. Yeah, but I don't want my shot to look like that. Let's actually put it back on matrix metering. I don't want it to, the sun's going behind the clouds now. This is what is meant. Sorry, I've actually lost the extreme dynamic range between the highlights and the shadows. This is what is meant by sensor saturation. You saturate in your camera and you expose in your computer. You don't put the cart before the horse. You don't make the shot in the camera. I'm not talking about clipping the highlights. Is that like abundantly clear? I mean, do people actually get what I'm saying? Or now the sun comes back out from under the clouds. So now we've got the extreme dynamic range once again. So now I know I can bring it up by about 2/3 of a stop and not lose any detail or information in my highlights. I'm not going to lose it. Not going to lose it at all. Yeah, but I don't want my shot to look like this. This is what everybody does. I want my shot to look like this. This is the composition and the ultimate rendering, how I want it to look. Oh, okay, so now you've actually dropped out all the tonality and information, not only in the highlights. When you actually underexpose or undersaturate the sensor, you're not just dropping it out in the shadows and completely losing everything. And if you try to raise it up in the shadows, you can raise it up, but it'll be muddy. It'll have poor tonality. It'll look like mud. You ever heard of muddy shadows? Muddy shadows is due to lack of sensor saturation. The more information, the better. I don't want my shot to look like this. Yes, but this is where I have the most information. Number one, I'm not clipping my highlights. It shows I'm clipping my highlights right now, but I know I've actually got 2/3 of a stop. I've got as much information in the shot as possible. Definitely as much information as possible also in the shadows. Oops, forgot to hit there we go. As much information in the shadows. So I've got as much information as is possible without doing flash photography and trying to actually raise up the shadows through some sort of flash means, which of course don't want to do that really with ambient light photography. Landscape, it's obviously not practical in most situations. This is the most information. If you want your shot to look like this, you know, in the print or on your computer, do that in your computer. Don't do it in your camera. Okay? This is what is meant by saturate in your camera and expose in your computer. No, that can't be right. That's heresy. What do you mean it's heresy? It's heresy because everybody knows that exposure occurs in the camera. No, your camera is about getting as much information as possible in the raw file. This is why you should be shooting raw, by the way, so that you have as much to work with in post-production as possible. The sun went back from behind the cloud again. I think I made that abundantly clear. Did I repeat myself like 4 times in this video? I did, but I hope I drove home the point. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Have a great 4th of July weekend. Peace out, Girl Scout.